Gary is always a great supporter of our club. In fact, I met Gary in person for the first time at the Florida Photo Fest
Mm-hmm.
back in April when I went down there. Hunt's Camera, everybody. He's pleased to help you with any new or used camera needs, and his sponsorship's been very valuable for us to get speakers like Chris.
Yeah, so appreciate that Gary kind of recommending me. And if anybody doesn't know Hunts is pretty prominent retailer in New England. I think they have 8 stores maybe across different states in New England, but they also have a big online business. And Gary is really one of the best in the business as far as customer support, customer service, trying to keep the community going, keeping clubs like this going. So if you ever need anything, check out Hunts, call Gary, especially with used stuff. He's always, happy to get you a good deal. So keep them in mind. And I saw the meeting's being recorded. That's totally fine by me. I just ask that it's not distributed beyond the club. But if anybody missed the meeting and you want to share anything I had to say tonight, they're welcome to watch as part of the club and part of this presentation.
Yeah, I should
Uh,
mention we have a private, secure site, and only members can see it. So
Perfect.
this is for those who weren't able to join tonight.
Sounds good. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen. Now let's see if I have permission to do so on Zoom. And if I do, we can get started. Let's do this. Oh, see, let's see if I'm allowed to share
Let's see if
screen.
I'm not seeing a request pop up. Julie, are you?
Oh, there, it's coming up now.
Okay.
You should be able to share, just share, press the share button and then you share your screen.
I think I may
Is
need
it
to.
at the, is it at it should be at the bottom
Yeah,
bar?
yeah, yeah. No, I have it. I just
Oh,
need to rejoin the meeting in 5 seconds because I just got a new computer the other day and it's asking me
oh,
to allow permission. So give me 5 seconds. I'll be back and we can get going.
sure, absolutely.
You bet.
Okay.
I'm going to mute myself out and Chris will be
Thank
back.
you, Mike. I actually would like to ask the entire club to mute themselves. And when you want to speak, you just press the space button. And that way we won't cough or interrupt by making background noises. Thank y'all.
All right. I'm back. Video on. And now I should be able to share my screen.
Awesome.
Perfect. There it is. Okay. Share screen, share screen. And I know that everyone was just asked to mute, but if somebody could tell me if they can see the title slide of the presentation, I see thumbs up from Mike. Perfect.
Yes, maximizing depth.
All right. Well, that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So thank you again to everyone. As mentioned, I am Chris McGinnis. I am an OM System Ambassador. I will use the words OM System and Olympus probably interchangeably tonight. Olympus has been around for over 100 years, making cameras since the 1920s. And then 5 years ago, the camera division was sold off from the main company Olympus and became OM Systems. So um, some products that are out in the wild and some of those in my own camera bag still say Olympus on them. I'm very used to saying the word Olympus, but the new brand name is OM System. First, housekeeping. We covered some of this already. Uh, this presentation was made just for you. Mike had reached out to me, so we want to talk about focus stacking, focus bracketing, things like that. I'm, of course, a macro photographer, and those are very near and dear to my heart, and I am very experienced in them. So hopefully I can demystify those for you tonight. I mentioned I use Olympus OM System gear. You're welcome to take notes. You're welcome to take screenshots. I just ask, as I did a minute ago, that this isn't distributed beyond your camera club. You all made time, and I made time for you, and this is really for this group tonight. And by not sharing, that kind of helps me connect with other clubs down the line. Q&A time will be allotted at the end. I'll stick around as long as everybody wants me to. I encourage you to follow me on social media. I'll have links at the end. I'm very easy to find on Instagram, Facebook, um, and I have my website, as Mike mentioned. And of course, I encourage you to shop at Hunts, as they kind of brought us together tonight. But also, if you're ever shopping online, especially for OM system gear or for accessories, and you shop through the links on my website, that does kind of tell OM system that I'm referring people and sometimes gives me a little commission feedback, which is always appreciated. All right. So the topics we'll cover tonight. First, I'll cover a little bit more introduction of myself just for a moment, and then we'll get into the gear that I use for macro. I'll explain some terminology and some concepts of what macro is and um, kind of clarify some things or maybe bring some things to your attention that you didn't know before. We're going to have kind of a chapter on magnification because magnification is really critical for macro photography, right? We're making small things look big. Then we're going to compare different apertures and see how aperture impacts the results of macro photos. I'll give you my camera settings. There's no secret here. I'm not trying to hide anything. I will tell you exactly how I shoot most of the time and what I change when. So you're welcome to apply those settings for your own photos if you like. Of course, focus bracketing and focus stacking. I'll show you several sample photos, give you a few tips for success, and then time at the end for Q&A. If along the way anyone has questions or if I cut out or if I say something that just doesn't make sense and you want to interrupt, just get my attention, come off of mute for a second, and I'm happy to go back and cover it. And if it makes more sense to cover that at the end, I'll just say, oh yeah, we're getting to that, or I'll come back to it. Okay, so the real quick, elevator pitch on myself. I was born and raised in New Jersey. I've lived here in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania for the last 27 years. I went to Moravian College, which is now Moravian University. It's a small liberal arts school here in Bethlehem, one of the oldest colleges in the United States, the sixth oldest college or university in the US. I began shooting in the 90s. That was the film days. Developed my own black and white film in the dark room and made prints on it larger, the old-fashioned way, which I really do feel like was a great foundation for me to transition into digital photography. And that transition really kind of kicked off when I started working at Olympus in 2007. I had an interest in photography before that. I had shot a bit, but then all of a sudden I had like access to tons of cameras and lenses and knowledge from coworkers and things. And then my kind of dedication switch to macro photography started about 10 years ago. All right. So first up, you want to take photos of anything, you need a camera, you need a lens, and for macro photography, I'd like to use a flash. These are the essential pieces of my kit. So I use the OM System OM1 Mark II. I use the OM System 90 millimeter macro lens. And I'll get into some other lens options in a second, but that's my primary lens. And then I use the Olympus or OM System FL700WR flash. The idea here is that I know everyone doesn't shoot Olympus or OM System. The idea is you want a camera body, you want a macro lens, a lens that's capable of one-to-one magnification. I'll explain that in a few minutes, but a true macro lens and some sort of light, right? You want to control the light and bring light to the equation. It doesn't have to be a fancy flash, doesn't have to be an expensive flash. This one happens to be weather sealed, which is really great. So I can take it in pouring rain or high humidity and I don't have to worry about it. But you can get a $75 Godox flash and make really, really nice macro results. Couple of other lenses. On the left is the 30 millimeter macro. On the right is the 60 millimeter macro. The lenses on this slide are not to scale. The 30 and 60 are incredibly tiny. In the center, that's the 50 to 200 f2.8. That lens is a bit bigger and it is not truly a macro lens, but it's a great, great option for shooting things like butterflies and dragonflies. In fact, I just wrote an article about butterfly photography. Hopefully, some of you see it. Top secret as to where it'll come out, but I think some of you may have access to that article in the coming months. But it's macro adjacent. It's still magnifying to a fairly high degree, but from a little bit further away. And what I really like about the OM System telephoto lenses, this one in particular, but some of the others, is you can get quite close to your subject and still focus. I can focus from 2.5 feet away with that telephoto lens zoomed to a 400 millimeter equivalent, right? So some telephoto lenses you have to be quite a bit further away in order to acquire focus. So not truly a macro lens, but one that I like to use for certain subjects. Next up, I have diffusers. So the one in the center is my diffuser of choice. If you're familiar with diffusers, you may have seen others like the AK diffuser or the MK diffuser. On the left and right, those are homemade versions that I made myself. But the idea is that I'm putting some sort of transparent or translucent, rather, white material between my light source and my subject. And anyone that's photographed in a studio with soft boxes or umbrellas or any light modifiers, the concept is the same. It's just that our light source is really close to our subject and our subject is really small. So relative to our subject, that diffuser is actually quite large. But if you don't have the diffuser, you're hitting your subject with a harsh blast of light, and you're going to get harsh shadows, highlights, reflections. So this diffuser softens and spreads the light, and very, very simple to use, but makes a really big difference. The one in the center, it's about $100. On the left and right, those are completely free. Those are just packing foam and cardboard and materials. So I always say any diffuser is better than no diffuser. And I think this is my last slide on gear. So uh, teleconverter, I have the 1.4 times teleconverter. I can use that with many of my lenses will be compatible with that teleconverter. So it gives me 40% extra reach. So for instance, on the 50 to 200, that would give me a long end of 280 millimeters or 560 millimeter equivalent in full frame terms. So more reach by putting that between the camera and lens. In the center, that's the Raynox DCR 250. And that's like a fancy magnifying glass that I can put over my lens. So I put that on the end of the lens over the glass, kind of like a filter. And um, it's essentially like holding a magnifying glass in front of the lens to bring more magnification. And I really like the Raynox for the 60 macro. I think it works really, really great. And chances are it will work with any macro lens from any system if you're shooting with Nikon or Canon or Sony or anything else. And then last but not least is extension tubes. Extension tubes actually don't have any glass element in them at all. Um, Sorry, I'm just hearing some background noise. I don't know if somebody is off mute, but I'm just going to keep going. So extension tubes go behind the lens, between the lens and the camera body, similar to the teleconverter, but there's no glass element with extension tubes. And all extension tubes do is move your lens glass further away from your camera sensor, and therefore your subject looks more magnified. Usually they're pretty cheap. They are pretty effective. They can compromise autofocus and they can let in a little extra light or leak light actually. So there's some compromises, but they are a good option to increase magnification. All right, so what the heck is macro? I've said the word many times. You've heard it here. You came to a presentation tonight about macro. Um, but I wouldn't be surprised if someone out there either doesn't fully understand it and just doesn't want to admit it, or maybe you think you understand it and you're not quite there. So I want to clarify that first and talk about one-to-one macro. And that's a phrase that we use a lot in the macro world. Our subject is represented by the number one and its size as one. And the sensor on the camera is the other one. Okay. And that true size of the dime in this case aligns to the size of the sensor to project an image. And one to one means the size that my subject is in real life is the size at its size that it will project onto the sensor. Like so. Okay. So if we were to crop out around the shape of the sensor, so the width of the dime is now spanning the full width of the sensor because they're roughly the same size in real life, that image will fill the sensor. And there's other ratios, and we get into ratios in a second, They're not super important in execution, but the concept is fairly important that you can understand. um, 2-to-1 magnification is double life size, or 1-to-2 magnification is half life size. Okay. So, but this is 1/1 true macro. And then people that get really, particular or snobby about it will see a photo and someone will say, "Oh, look at this macro photo I took." And I'll say, "Well, that's actually not macro because it's not full life size. It's not 1-to-1," which is, of course, true. Most of the time, it doesn't matter. Okay, so into magnification. All of our cameras, assuming we're shooting with digital cameras, have a sensor in them, a CMOS or CCD. There's a sensor that is accepting the light. And some of the most popular sensors that most of us have are full frame sensors, APS-C sensors, or 4/3 sensors. And I picked these three because they're really common, and it creates this nice comparison. Full frame on the left, APS-C in the center, 4/3 on the right. And I have their approximate sizes noted below the sensor images, where a full frame sensor is about 36 millimeters wide, and the 4/3 sensor, like I have in my camera, is about half that size. Okay. And that's where we get that 2x crop factor. So the dime is always the same size. So if we project a dime at life size onto a bigger sensor, the dime's going to look smaller. And you get the image in the bottom left. If you project that same dime, which is always the same size, about 19 millimeters across, onto a sensor that's a little under 18 millimeters across, that dime's going to fill the whole sensor with a little bit of overlap. So this is one of the reasons why I shoot with a 4/3 camera in the micro 4/3 system, because my results look more magnified and I'm trying to magnify my results, right? So less cropping is necessary and I get an image right in camera that looks more magnified than if I was using a bigger sensor. So in some cases, a bigger sensor is an advantage. In this case, the smaller sensor is the advantage. And then to talk about those ratios a bit, I'm going to bring them all up on the screen at once. In the bottom left there, we talked about 1-to-1, but you can have any ratio, right? Your subject, the dime, is always the same size, but the field of view changes. So top left, my field of view is 4 times the size of the dime. Top right, it's twice the size of the dime. Bottom left, it's the same size as the dime. And bottom right, it's half the size of the dime. So that's what these numbers mean. If you don't fully understand it right now, if this is brand new for you, that's okay. But I think just being introduced to the concept is valuable. Like I said, in practice, it doesn't matter all that much, but at least you kind of have familiarity and hopefully it starts to come together for you. Now, the next thing is talking about working distances as they're related to these magnifications. And this is something that a lot of people don't quite get right away. In order to achieve 1-to-4 magnification with my macro lens, it's different for every macro lens, I need to be about 14 inches away from my subject. To achieve 1/2 magnification, or 1/2, I need to be about 6 inches away from my subject. For 1-to-1 magnification, 3 3/4 inches away, and 2-to-1 magnification, because my macro lens can actually go beyond 1-to-1, about 2 5/8 inches away from my subject. Okay. And that's the distance to the glass. So subject to glass. So these exact numbers aren't super important when you're out photographing an insect or spider, but they are important to understand if I want maximum magnification, I need to be 2 to 3 inches away. It's not going to work. I can't be 5 or 6 inches away and expect my result to be fully magnified. Okay, that's not how the physics work of the lens. You have to be at these distances, or close to these distances to get close to this magnification. And here's a little bit more illustration of that. So my glass here is 3 3/4 inches away from my subject. I'm going to get 1x or 1/1 magnification. If I want that maximum magnification of 2x on my 90 macro, I need to get closer to the minimum working distance. That's 2 5/8 inches away. Now, I said whatever camera, whatever lens you have, this is going to apply. These are the numbers for my setup. Let's say you have a Nikon with a 105 macro lens on it, right? Every spec sheet for every lens will have distances. You can look for the minimum working distance or minimum focusing distance. That's the distance from your subject to this line on your camera. Okay, so that little circle with a line, if you have your camera handy, you can pick it up right now and look. Somewhere on the camera, there'll be that symbol. That's where the sensor sits inside your camera body. And if you were to measure from that spot to the subject, that's as close as you can get and still acquire focus, but it's also the highest magnification yield. Okay, so there is, you know, uh, a point to those numbers and to that marking. All right, now we're going to talk about aperture. When I talk to a camera club, like Mike said, he's been doing this for 51 years. A lot of people have been using cameras into photography for a long, long time. Most people understand the basic concept of aperture. They understand that the bigger hole, the lower number, lets in more light. The smaller hole, which is the bigger number, lets in less light. And people tend to understand that the small number apertures will yield a softer background, especially when you think about portrait photography. Everyone wants the f1.8, f2.8 lenses, f1.2, right? These big apertures where when you shoot using those apertures, you get the creamy soft background and the face in focus. Um, it's a little bit different with macro. And the reason it's different with macro is not because those principles change. It's because there's an additional factor that we really have to pay attention to. That additional factor is distance from subject. Because as our distance from subject decreases, so does our depth of field. And I just showed you, I'm taking photos from 2.5, 3.5 inches away. I'm eliminating depth of field, even at smaller apertures. So here I have an example. This is a water droplet on the end of a blade of grass. This is shot at f2.8. And in the top left corner, you see an illustration of how the aperture blades look. So it's a fairly open hole, right? The aperture, the hole the light's coming through is large. Everything is soft. The water droplet is sort of sharp. The water droplet in the front is totally out of focus. Very, very soft everywhere. The depth of field is probably a millimeter or less. At f8, which some people, especially in the portrait world, would say, oh my God, you can't shoot a portrait at f8. It's going to look terrible. You need it to be f2.8. Well, here, look at that background. It's still really soft. In fact, that front water droplet isn't even sharp, but the main subject of the water droplet at the tip of the grass is totally sharp, perfectly in focus. And then even at f16, the background is pretty soft. And now both water droplets are in focus, and the water droplet at the tip is completely in focus throughout the entire sphere of the droplet. Okay. So I point this out to show you that if you're having trouble getting enough depth of field in your macro photos and you're shooting at f2.8, f3.5 because you think that's where you should be, you probably have to close the aperture. But that's why we bring a flash in, right? Because we're eliminating light, so we need to bring light back in. And here's another example, simple series. So just that very front edge of the mushroom cap is in focus, and there's nothing wrong with this image. This is fine. I mean, you might say, yep, that's exactly what I was going for. But look how soft everything is. Still pretty soft at f8, but now most of the cap is in focus and a lot more detail shows up at f8. And then here at f16, we have the entire mushroom cap in focus, even bringing some of the stock into focus. The background is starting to get a little more distracting, but it's still maybe softer than you would think. And then those are the comparisons for everything. Okay. So now managing that depth of field. I just showed you that depth of field disappears as you get closer. It will increase conversely as you back up. So sometimes the simplest way to get more depth of field is just back up a little bit, but you are compromising magnification when you do that. So this example I really like. I shot this, I think, last year, and I've been putting in presentations, and I think it does a really good job illustrating the idea of how working distance affects both magnification and depth of field. So this is a tiny little keychain version of an Olympus camera. You can see the size based on the lens cap that it's sitting, or it's a body cap rather, that the keychain is sitting on top of. It's very tiny. This was shot at f16, but my working distance is 18 inches away. So I'm a foot and a half away from the subject, shooting at f16. This is the same aperture, but I'm only 9 inches away. Okay, so I'm going to go back for a second. So at sorry, back one more. There we go. At f16 at 18 inches away, that entire little camera is pretty well focused. I can see the texture on the camera body. I can read the word Olympus clearly. I can see the OMD label. It's pretty focused. But when my working distance decreases, all I've done is get closer. The word Olympus goes blurry. OMD goes blurry. The texture on the front of the camera starts to soften. And if I go even closer, that word Olympus is basically unreadable. The texture on the front of the camera is now soft and smooth. I'm still focused on the front of the lens. I was focusing on the front of the lens in all three cases, but because I've gotten closer, my depth of field has disappeared. So there we are at 18 inches of working distance, 9 inches of working distance, and 4.5 inches of working distance. The lens is always in focus, but the depth of field is dramatically reduced as we get closer. And here to crop them all equally, you can see the comparison side by side by side. And here's a real world example. Here's two photos taken with the exact same settings. 1/100th of a second, shot at f8, ISO 200. These were shot 1 minute apart, maybe 30 seconds apart. This is in Costa Rica, red-eyed tree frog. But you can see how on the left, 2 feet away, the entire frog is basically in focus, right? The whole face, anyway, is in focus. Maybe the fingers on each hand are out, but we have a lot of depth of field to work with at f8. But when I go close and I want to magnify the frog, I lose depth of field. But in this case, that was okay because I really just wanted to showcase the eye and the detail in the eye. Exact same settings, just a different vantage point, which is the perfect segue into camera settings. Okay, so a couple of points here. The first point is noted at the top, custom settings assigned to C1 on my mode dial. Most modern cameras, especially the higher end cameras from whichever manufacturer you have, you're going to have PASM on your mode dial, right? Program, automatic, or I'm sorry, you might have automatic, then you have program, aperture, shutter, priority, and manual. Those are the basics. But in a lot of cases, you might have bulb, so there'll be a B, and then you have numbers 1, 2, 3, or C1, C2, C3. And too many people never turn their dial to those 123 or C123 because they don't know what they are and you're really missing out. What those are custom modes that you pre-program to have baseline settings for whatever type of photography you want. For instance, I shoot a lot of macro photography with flash. C1 on my mode dial has my baseline settings, which are up on the screen right now, for macro photography with flash. I can have C2 set up for birds in flight. I can have C3 set up for landscapes, and so on. So even if you never shoot macro photography, one takeaway tonight could be, oh, I didn't realize I could custom set uh, a mode on my mode dial for sports photography, which I do, every Saturday. So take a look at that, look in your manual, look up video tutorials because it's always a little different on how to set it. But this is a great, great way to have your camera always ready. You turn it on and it's really close to what you need. So for me, that is having my camera behave as it would in manual mode. My default shutter speed is 1/100th of a second, and my default aperture is f10 when I'm using the 90 macro or f8 if I was using the 60 macro. My ISO is at 200. Now you might notice that 1/100th of a second at f10 and ISO 200 seems like I'm going to get dark images. But remember, I'm using a flash. So I can take advantage of the low ISO. I can take advantage of the smaller aperture, which is going to give me more depth of field. And I'm lighting the scene with a flash. I'm using single point autofocus. I'm using manual focus, but that's only because I use back button focus. So my autofocus is with back button, but my shutter button is not focusing. Um, I have sequential shooting turned on. So if I hold the shutter down, I'll fire multiple shots in a row. I use SOVF for my live view mode. If you're an OM system shooter, you'll have SOVF. If you are a shooter of another system, you might have something like night vision or live view boost. These are different names that essentially increase the brightness of your viewfinder when you're using a flash or when the light is dark because you we get used to seeing like a preview of exposure before we shoot, but when you use a flash, your camera doesn't know how bright that flash is going to be. So it tends to give you a dim image and you can't really see it to compose. So you'll want to take advantage of different live view mode. Face and eye detection can be turned off when you're photographing insects. Uh, Image quality, I'm always shooting in RAW. I leave my white balance set to normal, my picture mode set to natural, my image stabilization is fully on, and my camera has a setting for keeping warm color, and I prefer that to be off. And here's just a different view of those settings as they would be on the back of my camera.
Chris, a question?
Yeah,
On the flash, are you shooting full power, half power, through the lens? How do you know what setting for your flash?
yeah, great question. So I am shooting in manual mode, so not TTL through the lens. I'm shooting manual mode, and it's actually very simple conceptually, where obviously Mike has used the Flash. He understood how to ask the question the right way, but for those of you that maybe aren't familiar with Flash, you have a few different options. TTL is essentially your auto mode, right? It's going to figure out how bright to make the flash. In manual, you dial up an amount of power. So 1/1, back to ratios, is full power. 1/2 would be half power. 1/10 would be 10% power. I'm usually starting at about 1/10 or 1/8, and I go from there. I'm never increasing, I say never in, air quotes, but typically don't go stronger than 1/4 power. The reasons why I'm staying in that 1/10 power range is because I don't want to make my shots look artificial. I don't want them to be too bright and too, you know, look like they were shot with flash, essentially. And using a lower power will allow my flash to recycle faster so I can shoot more shots in succession. If you have your flash set to full power, You could certainly get the exposure right based on your settings, and maybe it looks fine, but the batteries have to recycle power, and it takes several seconds sometimes for your flash to be ready to fire again. I want the flash to fire 5 times a second or more, right? So I want that power to be down so it's available to me.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, a few more camera settings, and this is where if you haven't programmed custom settings on your mode dial, this is probably going to be extra exciting for you if you didn't know this. You, in a lot of cases, can change what the buttons do. All of our cameras have buttons on them. Some of them just say function, and those are your custom buttons. But in many cases, you can reprogram any button to do anything. So I said that I use ISO 200 the vast majority of the time. I'm not changing the ISO very often when I'm shooting macro with a flash. So I repurpose the ISO button to be magnification for focus assistance. The AF on button is on the back of my camera. That's my back button focus. The AEL button and the exposure compensation buttons, even though they say AEL and plus minus, I don't care what they say on them. I reprogram them to turn on focus bracketing or turn on focus stacking. And then I have two blank function buttons on the front of my camera, and I use them for focus peaking or to toggle my viewfinder mode. And here's like the schematic of what that looks like on my camera. So for instance, it says focus stacking in the center there, but the button that's circled is the plus minus for exposure compensation. That button does not change exposure compensation. It turns on focus stacking. Okay. But you can make these buttons do whatever you want. All right. Speaking of focus stacking, it's time for focus bracketing and focus stacking. So first up, the definition or the definitions. Focus bracketing refers to shooting a series of images with varying in-focus areas. To shoot a bracketed series, you can use focusing rails, in-camera technology, or manually vary your focus points. Focus stacking refers to the assembly or compositing of the in-focus areas of the shots from a bracketed series. Frames can be combined with in-camera technology or with various software solutions. You can bracket without stacking, but you cannot stack without bracketing. Okay. So I go through the exercise of explaining these definitions because a lot of times people will use them interchangeably, but they're not the same. Um, Focus bracketing is capturing a bunch of images that are slightly different from one another, and focus stacking is blending the focus together into a single image. Okay. Um, and when you stack, you need a bracketed series, but you could shoot a bracketed series and then never stack it.
I have a
So,
question, Chris.
yes, Lynette.
Um, what is on your previous slide? What is the a focusing rail?
Oh, focusing rail. Sure. The focusing rail is a device. If you were to Google focus rail or focusing rail, you'll see what it looks like, but um, it can be tabletop mounted or mounted on top of a tripod. And usually they're, I don't know, 10 inches long, and they have the same kind of mount that a tripod would have. And you fix your camera into that rail. And then there's a dial or a couple of dials where you twist the dial slightly and it moves your camera, the whole unit with the lens, forward or backward incrementally. So you could take any camera, you can use an old manual film camera, you fix it in the focusing rail, and you press the shutter button or use a release to fire the shutter. That takes a photo. You then turn the dial, say one rotation. That moves your camera that increment of one rotation. Now your focus point has moved. You take another shot. You then turn the dial. Your focus point has moved slightly again. You take a shot. So you're physically moving the camera and focus point by using that rail, and then you acquire a set of photos.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, so the benefits of bracketing, focus bracketing. And I clearly say focus bracketing rather than just bracketing because you can actually bracket other things. You can bracket exposure, you can bracket ISO, right? Bracketing just means varying. So when you shoot for HDR, for instance, that's exposure bracketing where you're shooting for the shadows and then you're shooting for the highlights and you're shooting something neutral and then you're blending these shots together. It's the same concept, but instead of varying focus, you're varying exposure. But why would you want to vary focus? Well, at the simplest, you increase your chances of hitting perfect focus because you've gotten several shots with different focus. Um, you capture a series of images with varied focus, so you can choose the one that you like after the fact. Maybe you're not sure if it's going to make the most sense to focus on the eye closest to the camera or the eye further away, and you then have a choice after because you bracketed focus. But more times than not, you're capturing a series of images with varied focus, so you can stack those images into a focus stack. How you do it? Uh, Various methods. You can do it manually, yet unscientifically, where you just put your camera in burst mode or drive mode. You press the shutter and you slightly move forward as the shots are firing. It is not scientific at all. It is not highly successful, but it can work, and it can work if you want to just stack two or three photos together. You can do it manually scientifically, which is what I explained with a focusing rail, where you're very calculated. You're turning that dial. Okay, one rotation, click, one rotation, click. And it's going to be very perfect increments of shifted focus. You can do it automatically, tethered to a camera. So I don't know if we have any studio photographers on the call right now, but like Capture One will let you plug into your camera. You can shoot tethered, and you can calculate the front of the image and the back of the image, and then it'll integrate with helical focus, and you can shoot a series of photos that have overlapping focus that you can then blend together, or you can do it in camera. And that's definitely my method of choice. My camera has this technology. There are other cameras from other manufacturers that also have this technology. And all I have to do is set my initial focus point and stay still, and my camera will automatically shift focus forward at whatever increment I tell it to, up to 999 shots. Okay, so all I have to do is press the button once, and then it'll fire away until I tell it to stop.
Chris, are you using a tripod?
No, I have never photographed an insect or spider with a tripod. So I'm always shooting handheld, but it is important to note that that does not mean it's easy. The reason why I'm shooting that way is for the flexibility and the ability to move from position to position and to get into certain positions. But when it comes to shooting a bracketed series, I have to employ, some tricks of staying really steady. My favorite position is physically laying on the ground, like belly down, elbows on the ground, staying really stable because I do need to stay steady for sometimes 5 seconds, maybe more, to shoot 50 or 100 shots. And the steadier you are, the better. But I'm not doing the tripod, I'm still doing handheld. So now the benefits of focus stacking. I said the benefits of bracketing, not necessarily stacking, but of course, one of the benefits of focus bracketing was stacking. And the reason you would do this or want to do this is you can control exactly which areas of your image are in focus, and you can produce an image with a greater perceived depth of field than you could get with a single shot. Um, you increase depth of field, but you can still take advantage of larger apertures. So if you wanted the look of f4, but you want the depth of field of f16, you can have the best of both worlds because you can have the really, really soft out of focus areas, but you can blend 5 or 10 shots together to get enough depth of field to have the parts in focus that you want in focus. And then you can just produce images with an exaggerated sense of sharpness. When you stack focus, you're producing an image that looks even sharper than it would in reality. And how do you do that? Well, you can do it in camera as well if your camera has the technology. That's another great benefit of the OM system OM1, OM1 Mark II. And really, I think all of the current OM system cameras have the ability. And of course, there are other cameras from other manufacturers that have it as well. So, check your manual, check online, check the spec sheets to see if your camera can do this. But even if it can't, you can use third-party software after the fact. Helican Focus, Serene Stacker, OM Workspace is the OM software, Photoshop, and others. So, how to focus stack? Well, the first thing you have to do, I told you a few minutes ago, is capture a focus bracketed series. So you're going to set your initial focus at the front of your subject, the part that's closest to your camera. So if I'm photographing an insect, for instance, it's the front of the face, if I'm face to face with the subject. And then each shot after the initial shot is going back in space through the subject. So let's use my own face as an example, or your face as an example. Someone's photographing a face. The first shot needs to have the very tip of your nose in focus because that's closest to the camera. The second shot, the very tip of the nose will be out of focus, but now the nostrils will come into focus. The third shot might have the whole nose out of focus, but the cheekbones are coming into focus, and so on until you're all the way back to the back of the ears. Okay? So keep that example in mind for when I get to the insect examples in a few minutes. So here's a single shot at f6.3. That's a spider. I would happily entertain the idea that this is a perfectly good shot. Okay. It's at f6.3. The eyes are in focus. I got focus exactly where I wanted it. But there's a lot of detail that's soft around the other parts of the spider, and I'd like to showcase those other details. With 20 shots, I can do that. Okay, so now I have focus starting toward the front and going through to the back of the head. And if we were to look closer, you now see how when I crop in, the eyes are still in focus. That's fairly compelling, but here you get all of that glorious detail in a wider field of view. Okay, so now a sample series. So these are 12 images, and I varied focus. I know it may be a little hard to see. I know everyone's on different size screens, but I'll explain and then I'll give more examples for you. The top left image of this crocus, the petal that's closest to the camera is in focus. The bottom right image, that same petal closest to the camera, is completely out of focus. Every shot in between has focus somewhere in between. So these were all shot at f4. And that's what the stacked image looks like when they're blended together. This was focus stacked in camera. So I said that my camera has the ability to stack in camera. There is a limit of 15 shots in camera. So a lot of times I will still focus stack on the computer with Helican Focus software, but it can be done in camera, with some limitation. Now you might be saying, if you want more depth of field, just shoot at f16. You get more depth of field. But look what it does to the other elements in the field of view. The grass is distracting, right? The flower is in focus, but the grass is also in focus everywhere. And there's a lot going on here. Versus 12 shots where the whole flower's in focus and that background is completely soft and not distracting anymore. So for me, that's what I like. That's what I was going for. I choose the image on the right. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with the image on the left, but this is how you manage that depth of field.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It may be a dumb one, but whatever.
Sure.
So when you say you're changing your focus, are you changing your focal point or you're moving yourself closer to the subject?
Yeah, so
What are you changing?
my preferred method is to let the camera do it for me. It's an automated process where I'm activating focus bracketing in the camera, and then all I have to do is set the initial focus, and then all of the subsequent focus points are shifted automatically by the camera. If my camera didn't have that feature, or I wanted to do it manually, I would have to physically move forward, millimeter by millimeter, shot to shot, or you could use something like a focusing rail to do it. But I don't need to do anything. I just need to stay still, and my camera will shift focus from shot to shot.
On your previous image, you showed an 8 differential. Was
Yes.
that 8 millimeter differential or
Yeah. So it's not a unit of measure. Um, it's a scale. So and this might be different in other cameras. I think some systems call it gap, um, but it's an increment. And
okay, gap makes sense.
yeah, so it's the amount of space between shots, and one is the least amount of space, and 10 is the highest amount of space. So typically, the bigger the subject and the further away you are, the bigger the gap can be, or the bigger the differential can be. This flower is pretty big relative to macro subjects. I was probably a foot or so away, but for really tiny subjects, my differential is usually like 2 or 3. If you were shooting a landscape, because you can do focus stacking for anything, doesn't have to be macro, um, you might have a focus differential of 10. But that's what that number is. The bigger the number, the more space between shots. The smaller the number, the less space between shots.
With reference to a macro rail, it would be equivalent to 1 full turn, 1 quarter turn, 2 full turns, etc.
It are you asking me that or are you saying that? Because if that's the case, I didn't know that, but that could be.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
In other words, your differential is the distance between
Yes.
the shots, and using a macro rail would
Yes.
be how much you vary between shots.
Exactly. Yep. So when you're using a macro rail, you have to determine, okay, I'm going to turn 1 full revolution on each or 2 full revolutions on each. Here you're using a differential to say I'm going to use a differential of 2 or a differential of 4 or whatever. Yes, same idea. Yep. All right. On to a demonstration. So we're going to use the same example. This is actually one of the first shots I ever focus stacked. And to this day, it's probably the best long-legged photo I've ever taken. If anyone's ever tried to photograph long-legged flies, they're incredibly fast and twitchy, and they do not cooperate. So I was really happy to get this shot when I did. Just 3 shots, bracketed series. The first shot on the bottom, in the series of 3 on the left. The shot on the bottom right, the front of the face is in focus. The shot on the top left, you can see that the front of the face is completely out of focus. Okay. So we're going to blend them together to get the result on the right. And we're going to do that with Helican Focus software. Going to show you that demo now. So I have Helican Focus right here. I'm not going to get into all of the details of how to use Helican Focus. That's another, multi-hour class, but I want to show you just kind of how it works. So here I have 3 images prepared, and I'm going to drag those into Helican Focus. You can do this in a number of ways. You can do it right from Lightroom. But the point is, you need these images loaded into the software, and here they are on the right. So I'm going to zoom in now so you can see the difference. So that third image, the image is labeled 3, the front face is in focus. Let me move it down a little bit. There we go. Front of the face is in focus. Now it's a little bit out of focus, and now completely out of focus. Okay. But when I blend them together, and I have 3 options, method A, B, or C, they just use different algorithms to blend in focus areas. You see that tooltip there. It says works best for continuous surfaces, produces smooth transitions and preserves colors, or method C is good for intersecting objects. Um, Honestly, experimenting with these methods is the best way to understand them. But I'm going to use method B right now, and I'm going to say render. And very quickly, I'll do it again. You see the process and the result. So any of the images on the left don't look as sharp as the image on the right because the image on the right is using all of the in focus pieces to composite into a stack. Okay. So this is a very simple example. I'm going to do a more complex example in just a minute. So let's bounce back over to the presentation. And we're going to do 16 shots. So here we have a polished lady beetle, and I know these shots at this size probably all look very, very similar. And they're of course composed the same way, but they're not all in focus. And I'm going to showcase that in a second. But when you stack them together, I get the front of the leaf curl, the lady beetle's face, the shell, all in focus at the same time. And I still get that nice soft background. And you can see if I push in, everything is pretty sharp. So let's do that one in Helix and Focus again. So I'm actually going to exit and go back into Helix and Focus. This will be the fastest way. And I have my 16 shots here. Again, you can get these shots into Helix and Focus in a number of ways. Typically, I'm just exporting right from Lightroom, but I have the images saved here. I'm going to drag them into my, and it even says here, to add source images, please drag images or use file open images. And now you'll be able to see the differences I was talking about. So this image essentially looks like I missed focus, but that's intentional because I wanted to get this in focus. Okay, just this part here. The next shot is a little bit further back in space. If I jump 10 photos forward, let's go a little less than that. Now the shell is in focus here. If I go back in time a little bit, the face of the lady beetle is in focus, but the shell is soft and the leaf over here is soft. But if I render this, we now see everything in sharp focus. And I'm actually going to render with method C because I like the way that method C visualizes it. I think that it's helpful to see how the calculations are happening. So I'll do it a couple times for the sake of demonstration. So you see how the software like analyzes the image in black and white, and then it blends it all together. It's happening very fast. I mentioned I got a new computer. This is much faster than my old computer used to be. But it's happening very, very quickly. Okay. And Helix and Focus not only gives you the ability to render in multiple methods and adjust parameters, you can retouch. It's really, really fast. I'm also going to show you how to do this with Photoshop because I know a lot of people have Photoshop and it's a completely viable option. So, as I said, with Photoshop demo, but I'll use a different set of photos. It's the same idea. So we've got this root maggot fly. That photo, the front of the face and the front of the eyes is in focus. Nothing wrong with this photo, but there are a lot of details in the hairs behind the head and on the body that I want to show. I want to see it. I want those eyes to be like really, really sharp, but not just part of them sharp. So here's a series of, I think, 6 photos where focus goes again from front to back. And that's the end of the series. So now the face is totally out of focus, but the hairs on the back are in focus. And when I stack them, we get a result like this. Okay. And that's the pushed in view. So let's do that one. And we're going to do this one with Photoshop this time. Let me go to Photoshop, which I have over here. And I'm going to grab those 6 images and drop them into Photoshop. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to rasterize these layers because right now they're smart objects and I can't work with them that way for the sake of what I'm about to do. So those are rasterized. And I have my 6 images. So if I zoom in again, you'll see fly number 6 is pretty out of focus, but the details back here are in focus. And then fly number 1, the eyes are basically in focus. Okay. So now I'm going to select all of my layers. And I'm going to go to Edit, Auto Align. And this step is important because if we watch the edges of my canvas, you'll see you get an option here to do auto, or you can do some different types of alignment. We're just going to do auto. Say OK. Look at that. There were little differences. See that? How my canvas has shifted a little bit? And over here. So there's little differences. We can just crop that now. Just a little bit. And then those are gone. But if we don't align the images first, then our in focus areas aren't going to be perfectly matching. And we want them to be as matching as possible. Now we've got our images aligned and we want to stack them. So we're going to go to Auto Blend. And we get options here for panorama or stack. We're, of course, doing stacking. We'll leave the seamless colors and transparent content aware fill on. We say OK. And lo and behold, we get an image that looks very similar to the one before. It's a little dark. I didn't adjust the exposure prior, but for anyone that's familiar with Photoshop, we can, we can just add a brightness and contrast layer and we can do this, or right? Like we can do whatever we want, or we can add curves or exposure levels. And, we can adjust whatever we want now. And we can see it like so. Okay. So pretty good result. But what happens in Photoshop is you actually get all these layers with masks. So you get your merged image, but then if I were to turn on just one layer, that's the parts of the image that it's using from each layer to be in focus. And you can modify these masks, but it gets a little clunky. Okay. So, but totally viable option for focus stacking. And now for in camera. The easiest way for me to show this is to play a little animation or video, because obviously if we're on Zoom and for me to hold my camera up and show you something is a little tricky. But in-camera stacking with OM system works a little bit different. It's the same concept, but the focus actually shifts backwards and then forwards. So your initial shot is taken, focus comes back toward you a little bit to make sure you're capturing all those details up close, and then it goes back into space through the subject up to 15 shots. And here's an example that I shot focus stacked in camera, and I'll play this animation a couple times, but you can see the focus shifting from shot to shot until the subject's basically out of focus. And then the final image looks like that. Okay. And this is essentially exactly what comes out of the camera already stacked. The only difference is I say processed in Lightroom because I adjusted the contrast and color a little bit. But I didn't really have to do anything. I didn't have to manually stack or blend the images. That all came out of the camera that way. So I'll just run that animation one more time so you can see it work. There you go. All right. So now on to my photos. For those of you that are interested in seeing them, I hope you enjoy. This is always my favorite part because I get to, take a trip down memory lane because I always remember exactly where I was and what I was doing when I took these photos. First up, I have a shot of a frog hopper. This is a focus stacked image, 12 frames. I did stack this with Helical focus. This was shot at f.5.6 at 1/100th of a second. And my favorite part of this photo is this droplet right in the center of the head, right? Or like just behind the eyes. I don't think no, I didn't zoom in on it, but um, it's like this perfect little sphere right in the center. Plus the fact that the bug looks like it's kind of waving, right? So I thought that was kind of cool. And this is a really challenging subject. These frog hoppers do not like you to get close. So I was really happy that I got close enough to pop off 12 shots and get this. Here's a shot, also in Costa Rica, as that first shot was. This is bromeliad spider, tiger bromeliad spider. This is 5 shots. Um, Focus stacked with Helical focus at 5.6 again, 1/100th of a second. This one was really, really challenging because I said earlier that I really like to make sure I'm stable and I get down on the ground and I support myself. I had nothing to lean on. It was pouring rain. This spider was like in a bush and I was kind of leaned over at an awkward angle. So I would have loved to get more shots and get more in focus, but I was able to kind of get the important bits, right? The face and the pedipalps in front and some of those water droplets. So pretty happy to be able to pull that off. And this is a humongous spider uh, for reference. Probably top 5 largest spider species I've ever seen in person. Costa Rica again. So this is a weevil. I forget the species name of this particular weevil, but this was on the side of a building. So the white surface is like a stucco, and this was 10 shots in camera stack. This is exactly how it looked out of camera, which is really, really cool. It's such a time saver and so convenient. Um, you know, line up, frame my shot, press the shutter button, and walk away with this. So, looks kind of like a textbook shot to me. Like this would be something you would see in a, science book or something, which is really nice. This is in Panama. These are red-eye tree frog embryos. So each of those little budding tadpoles is alive and moving around in the jelly of the eggs. Um, they are moving, but they do pause. So this was a game of I need 2 or 3 seconds of them to stay still so I can fire 15 shots and make this stack. But again, this is done, the focus bracketing and focus stacking are done in camera. F10, 1/100th of a second, ISO 200. Those are the base settings that I gave you 30 minutes ago when I showed you my camera settings. So this is literally like a turn the camera on, don't change anything, and this is the shot. Stink bug. So this is the brown marmorated stink bug, very notorious in the area where I live in Pennsylvania. Invasive species came around about 25 years ago, and they are here to stay and have spread quite a bit since 25 years ago. This was shot with the 60 macro, f6.3, 1/100th of a second, and this is 10 frames stacked, but again, in camera. So really just an exercise in framing up the shot and staying still, hoping that the subject stays still. Stink bugs are nice because they don't move that much. They're pretty tolerant as opposed to like that frog hopper in the beginning where frog hopper doesn't want to stay still at all. Stink bugs they'll stay put. Um, so they're really good species to practice on and they're pretty interesting looking. And that was shot just, I think, in my house on a house plant. This next one, this is Costa Rica as well. This is a Stauffer's tree frog. So this was shot 15 frames in camera stack. I love in camera stacking for frogs. I think it works perfectly for them. I think it's something to do with like the smooth textures and the transitions that the in camera algorithm does a really, really good job with it. This is it. The only thing that I had to do to this was there was a little kind of goober of dirt on the lip of the frog that I thought was distracting, so I edited that out. But this is the result right out of camera, which is really, really cool. So f9, 1/80th of a second, ISO 200, 15 frames stacked in camera. And this, where were we? This shot, this was one of the absolute very first photos, not only that I took with the 90 millimeter macro, that anyone took with the 90 millimeter macro, because I was the first photographer ever to use that lens. OM System developed the lens, and about 4 or 5 months before it was released commercially, uh, they sent me on this trip to Costa Rica to test the lens, and this was one of the very first shots I took with it. So here's a carpenter bee. This is a male carpenter bee on some flowers. This is in the early evening, so the bees were kind of settling in, so they weren't moving around too much. So I just had to get myself stationary, get in a position where I could frame up this portrait composition. And this is actually 40 shots. Okay, so 40 frames where I need to get really stable. I need to make sure my subject isn't moving. And um, all I have to do is press that shutter one time, but I have to stay still while it's doing its job for 40 frames. And 40 frames probably takes, 7 seconds to finish shooting. But if all goes well, you can then blend them together in Helical Focus and let Helical Focus do the heavy lifting for you. And this is the result you get. 26 frames. This is always a kid's favorite because anything with poop in it is always a kid's favorite. So this is a uh, milkweed beetle, so longhorned beetle. Um, this was all about the dewdrops, right? The fact that it's leaving some poop behind it isn't really what the shot was all about. But when I noticed that, I figured, okay, well, like that's just one more element to add to the shot and to the story. But this is um, hundreds of perfect little round water droplets. And I wanted to make sure I got as many of them in focus as I could. And to do that, I used focus stacking and 26 shots at f5. I think I have two more shots maybe. So here's a little sweat bee. If anybody's familiar with these, they're very, very tiny bees. You could probably fit a sweat bee on your pinky fingernail. And this one is 40 frames shot at ISO 200 and 1/80th of a second. And yep, last but not least, I always love when I can get more than one subject in a shot. But with more than one subject, more challenge of depth of field, right? More of a depth of field challenge. And here I wanted that the green bottle fly, the prey, I wanted its face in focus, but I also wanted the robber fly, the predator, to be in focus at least through the face and back toward the wings. So to do that, there's no way I could achieve this with a single shot. I knew that I needed more shots. In fact, my aperture's at f8. I'd have to go to like f80 to get this kind of look, which of course I can't do. So I'm shooting at f8, 24 frames, and then those are stacked with Helical Focus again. And now the home stretch. I think I've been talking for about an hour and 10 or 15 minutes. Just a few more minutes to give you some tips. I think some of you probably latched onto a lot of what I said. Some of you probably started falling asleep, but if I can get you to tune in for just a few minutes, I think I can give you a little bit to walk away with and hopefully use sooner than later. So the first tip, a little bit of a cop out or cliche, but it's to be patient. Macro photography is really an exercise in patience. It'll help you find subjects. It'll help you steady your camera. It'll help you get those bracketed series that are actually going to work. So, as I say here, slow down, relax, and you will be rewarded. We talked a lot about focus bracketing and focus stacking tonight, but single shots can still be really successful. Um, all of my sample photos were focus stacks because that's kind of how the presentation was tailored. But that doesn't mean that every successful macro photo is a focus stacked photo. You can start with singles. You can shoot singles, get a shot kind of on the memory card, and then start experimenting with trying to shoot the bracketed series for stack. But sometimes subjects aren't going to cooperate. It's going to be a little windy. It's hard to get in a position where you can get stable enough to shoot 5 or 10 or 50 shots. So don't forget that you can still shoot singles and be totally successful. Brace yourself. You need to be steady. I said I don't use a tripod. There I am in position. That's how I photograph spiders in the grass. That's how I photograph anything on the ground. Because even though my hands are managing the camera, the impact that my hands have on the camera is minimal. Minimize variables. So here we are with an inanimate, non-living subject. This is how you practice. Okay. Practice inside, practice on things that don't move, understand how your flash works, mess up, change things, mess up again, change your focus differential, try focus stacking with 5 shots, 10 shots, 15 shots, and figure out how everything works. So when you go outside and you're interacting with a live subject that you never thought you would get to photograph, you have a much better chance of getting it right. Okay? It's the same exact thing on your tabletop, on your desk, in your office, on your kitchen counter, as it is in the field. But inside, with an inanimate subject, you have full control. That's where you practice, that's where you hone your skills, and then you take those out into the field. And last but not least, have fun. Macro is hard. Focus stacking live subjects is even harder when you're out in the field, especially this time of year. You guys are in Louisiana. It's probably more of the year than it is in Pennsylvania. It's hot, it's sweaty, it's humid. Um, you're going to miss more shots than you probably want to admit. I certainly do. But look at it as you're out there having fun, you're enjoying nature, you're exercising, you're seeing things that other people don't get to see. And if that's the case, you're never going to go home disappointed. And now we're on to Q&A. Before I close my presentation, I just want to say thank you to all of you. Those are my websites and socials on the bottom, so feel free to connect anytime. But I'm going to stop sharing so I can see anyone that comes on camera, and I can, there we go, and answer some questions.
I have a question,
Yep, Barry.
a comment. First of all, this stuff is very analogous to CT scanning.
Sure.
I
Yep.
don't know if that was part of development of all of this or not, but it's very interesting because CT scans are, as you know, layers and
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. But my question is really more basic. In Lightroom, in the past, I have done there's settings on my Nikon for bracketing, and I think it's 3 or 5, I forget. But anyway,
Mhm.
is is that similar to what you're talking about, but just not as good and not as specific and not as sharp if you then merge those or combine those?
Um, I'm not sure what you're asking. Are you asking if the setting on your Nikon would be able to produce the same type of results?
Well, no, I just wondering, you can set it up to bracket where you take some shots,
Yeah.
and then you can seem like there's a setting in Lightroom where you can go and merge those.
Yeah, so that's the same as the photo merge in Photoshop, the auto blend. So it's using the same technology.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can absolutely do it there as well. And I wouldn't say that it's not going to be as good. It can absolutely be really good. So it's just another option.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank
Yeah. So definitely try it out. Um, I, I mean, I could show all different software to do it. I show Photoshop because I know a lot of people have it. So if someone wants to go experiment right away, they say, "Well, I have Photoshop. I can try an example like Chris showed." But yeah, and Zareen Stacker is another one. Heel Look and Focus, in my opinion, is the best software option. It costs about $160, I think, for a lifetime license. It's not the kind of thing where you have to like subscribe to. So if you're going to do a lot of focus stacking, it's definitely worth it. But if you're not, or you just want to experiment, yeah, Lightroom, Photoshop, use the things you have already.
thank you.
Hmm.
Chris, I've got a question
Yeah.
here.
Hey,
So, first of all, that was a really great presentation. I love shooting bugs and things. The club can tell you I'm always shooting like snails and small stuff.
great.
Um, so I was wondering, how do you know how many shots and how big of a gap you need between
Yeah,
them?
very good question. Um, so the gap I somewhat addressed, but I'll kind of go over it again in conjunction with the answer to how many shots. So the gap or focus differential is really relative to how far you are away from your subject. So the closer you are, the smaller the gap. So my default focus differential is at 2, but that's, excuse me, because I know that I like to be really close to my subjects. If I was a little further because that's what the situation offered, I might go in and adjust that setting. So I'm starting at a very low number. But if you photograph flowers, entire flowers instead of the faces of bugs, you might say, well, my default's going to be a 6, right? Because I'm a little further away. So that's how you handle the focus differential. But the number of shots, what's really nice, and this is like if I'm teaching a workshop in the field, this is like the big pro tip takeaway. I don't know what camera system you use or anyone else uses or what the settings are that are available, but on my camera, you can dial up between 3 and 999 shots for focus bracketing. Okay. And everyone says, well, how the hell do I know if I need 3 or 30 or 992, right? Like, there's no way to know. And I don't know either, but I don't care. What I do is I set it to 999 all the time. And what a lot of people don't realize, even people that have been using bracketing for years, is you can stop it. So I start shooting. I can go outside right now. I can find a spider in the grass. I say, ooh, I want to shoot a bracketed series. I set my focus at the front of the spider. It's set to 999. I press the shutter once. It goes here, 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 here. 20 or 30 shots in. I'm not counting. I don't know how many it was. I just see that my focus has gone through the subject and I stop it. And that's it. And then when I
Okay,
get
so
to
your
my
camera is
computer,
showing you the preview as you take the
it's
pictures. Because I've
happening in
tried it
real
before,
time.
but mine
Yeah,
I don't think is showing the preview.
that
So I
might
didn't
be.
know. So I just
Yeah.
had to take a bunch of
You have to
like
guess.
million
Yeah.
stacks at the different sizes. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's a really nice real-time feedback experience. So yeah, I just watch, and when focus seems like it got to where I need it to be, then I stop. And I usually start in front of the subject too. That's another tip because you can throw those photos away. If I have a couple of photos out of focus that are too close to the camera, no big deal. That's better than missing the first couple shots.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Yep.
Can I
so
clarify on
Chris,
that question though? I'm sorry, Carrie, I interrupted you.
it's okay.
When you were talking about you were watching the focus through the subject and back.
Yeah.
It's just the JPEG preview popping up you're watching, right? It's not that the camera's showing you the black and white back and forth like it did with Helicon.
No, it's a full color preview. Yeah.
Yeah, it's full raw.
Of the
You're
entire
doing it
image.
in live view?
Yeah. In live view or through the viewfinder, either one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a full preview. I know some cameras only show you the black and white. I think Nikon actually does a black and white. Um, Maybe even a focus stacking camera, black and white. But yeah, it's a full color real example. So it's great. Carrie, do you have another question?
Well, that was my question.
Oh,
If you were using live view or
oh,
through the viewfinder, because whenever I use live view, I can see it stack, in live view. But I don't have much success with it. I much rather do it manually by just moving my focus points, myself.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, the concept is the same, right? The execution is whatever you're comfortable with or wherever you find success.
Yeah, but I'm not making images like you.
Well, maybe they're better. I don't know. I haven't seen your images. Anybody
Thank,
else have any questions? Who's
thank you.
that?
Well,
Oh, I hear a
Chris,
big
I was
echo.
going to, oh, I'm having feedback because I'm having trouble. Let's see.
Mute the speaker on your
Okay.
computer if you're using your phone.
I can hear you now, Julie. Give it a try. Oh, now she's gone.
She
I have
lost
a
she
question.
lost the sound during the presentation, so she had to go back and
If
sign
you
off
have a
the phone.
if you have a question, Julie, and you're having a hard time with your mic, just put it in the chat. I'll read it there. Oh, and I see some questions in the chat. So I see, is focus stacking a nature shot for competition except the PSA rules? And I saw somebody answered, yep, yeah. So um, there are most contests will tell you if focus stacking, whether it's whatever contest it is, will tell you if focus stacking is allowed or not. Same with other editing techniques. Typically it is though. And then I see the guidelines from Anne below. No, for sure, as long as you're right. There's the answer.
So I have
Perfect.
I have another question.
Sure.
So I know you were talking about sensors and the crop factor and the 4:3. Is that's something that you can change in camera or it's just your sensor? Because
Yeah,
I see
so
I have that in camera.
yeah, so in camera you can change the ratio of um, the proportions of how your photo will be framed, but you can't change the physical available sensor size. So
Okay, yeah, yeah.
my sensor is natively a 4:3 ratio. You might have a 2:1 sensor or something else. But you can shoot square, you can shoot vertical, but then you're throwing pixels away. So if you want to use the
Hmm.
full sensor, you have to use it in its native proportions.
Okay.
And then I see the question from Julie just came in. Does the smaller gap require more images in your stack? It does. So if you are taking smaller steps from shot to shot, that means you need to take more shots in the series in order to get further in space. So, for instance, if let's use a spider as an example, you want the front of the face to the back of the head, and you're shooting with a focus differential of 2, it might take you 30 shots to get from the front of the face to the back of the head. But if you shoot with a focus differential of 5, it might only take you 10 shots to get from the front of the face to the back of the head. But sometimes, and this is why you can't say, oh, well, just use a bigger differential and then everything's going to be fine. You can take too big of a step and then you have gaps in focus where the tip of the nose will be in focus. And then in the next shot, the eyes are in focus, but the cheeks are never in focus. Okay. So you have to make sure you have enough overlap of focus from shot to shot. That's why you can't take too big of a step. Do you ever use masks before blending? No, you can use masks if you're auto blending in Photoshop, and you can use the masks to edit. Um, unless your question is, I will mask if I'm just manually blending focus from two photos together. That's kind of like a manual focus stack technique. But other than that, I'm not. If your subject slightly moves during the shots, does that ruin the shot? You bet it does. It sucks. So once you get your technique down where you can stay still, that doesn't mean that the subjects are going to cooperate. So happens all the time. It depends on how savvy you are with your editing software of how much you can fix movements. Um, you can rotate a frame or you can clone out some details, but the best case scenario is everybody stays still. Anybody else?
Not sure. How do you know what f-stop to use?
Yeah, so my general rule of thumb for a starting point is using an f-stop or an aperture that is in the middle of the range for your lens. That tends to be the sharpest aperture, regardless of lens, regardless of manufacturer, right? You can even look online, you can Google whatever lens you have, and you can say, what's the sharpest aperture for this lens? So I like to start at the sharpest. And what happens is as you go to the ends of the range, the smaller apertures introduce diffraction, the bigger apertures there might be aberration or distortion, right? So you want the sweet spot in the lens. So that's where I'm starting. That said, you can still take advantage of the benefits of wider or smaller apertures, but I'm doing that stylistic reasons and for exposure reasons. So I might want the look of a wider aperture to really soften the out of focus details. So I'm going to open my aperture a bit. Or I might want more depth of field in a single shot in particular. So I might close my aperture a little bit. Or I might just want more light or less light, which is, of course, we learn that very early when we're learning photography that bigger aperture, more light, smaller aperture, less light. So it's a starting point where the lens tends to deliver the sharpest results, and then you're changing from there as the situation dictates.
So
Thank, thank you.
oh, along with the question about things staying still, do you find that your flash scares things a lot? Like,
It really
is it sometimes
doesn't.
easier without a flash?
Yeah, it really doesn't. Um, the long-legged flies, I feel like do have a response to light. Other than that, I mean, spiders tend to, I mean, you could fire flash 100 times, spider doesn't move. Like they move when they want, but it really doesn't seem to be the flash. And I have got a question a few times and have looked up. There's been some studies on the impact of flash on subjects, and it's kind of like, you know, no data shows that it's having any negative impact on, because people get nervous. They're like, "Whoa, like you're doing this for the fun of photography and you're killing insects to do it," but that doesn't seem to be the case.
And
I
then
go ahead.
if you so like I don't own a flash yet.
Mhm.
I'm still acquiring pieces of my kit.
Yeah.
And so I have acquired a couple of like the steady lights. So one is like a light bar that's just
Mhm.
always on.
Mhm.
Is that's usable as well, or like a
It's
flash is
definitely
better than
usable.
that?
Do you have a macro lens, like a true macro lens? You do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would highly, highly recommend getting a flash. And I will say that it was the single biggest change and step forward in my macro photography was adding a flash. The reason why it's better, in my opinion, it has advantages over. I mean, I guess you could argue better in different ways, but the advantages that it has over continuous light is if you notice, my shutter speeds are often quite slow, but my results are quite sharp. And that's because the flash, just like in a studio or if in sports photography or whatever, you're freezing the motion with the flash. With continuous light, you need to rely on ISO and aperture and longer shutter speeds. And then you bring in motion blur. But the flash kind of solves all of that at once. And you can shoot at a 50th of a second in the wind and still get sharp shots. And that's a crazy concept to people that haven't done it. So, but yeah, you don't have to go expensive. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just Godox is probably the most popular budget brand. And whatever system you shoot with, there's an option for it.
So yeah, I just have been intimidated because there's so many extra settings and things that you have to figure out. So maybe Mike, one of our educational meetings could be about how to use the Flash.
I'm so glad you asked. That's the final one we have in November.
So you got to get your flash before November, Emily.
I
And
think
I
we have another
see,
question in the chat.
yeah, thanks. I see Archie asking about some of the older Olympus cameras is good for in-camera stacking. For sure. In-camera stacking has been in Olympus cameras for about 10 years, um, maybe 8 years. So going back pretty far. Um, it's been pretty similar of how it works and the results that it can produce for most of that time, but there are some advantages along the way. So when the OM1 came out, the OM1 replaced the EM1 Mark III, and with the EM1 Mark III and EM1 Mark II before that, the fastest shutter speed you could use was 1/50th of a second with a flash when you were stacking, right? So like there were limits. Now it's 1/100th of a second. So you do have certain advantages with the newer equipment, but I mean, I shot with an EM1 Mark II for years and got really good results. And then are the automatic capabilities of bracketing and stacking in the camera done with mirrorless cameras and not DSLR cameras? Yeah, I don't know of any DSLRs. I mean, someone on the meeting here can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of any that can do in-camera bracketing and stacking as a DSLR. I mean, you could do it tethered um, with software like Capture One could do it, but that's not in camera. Um,
I have a Canon 90D, which is a DSLR, and I can do in-camera stacking.
Oh, you can. Okay, so there you
Yeah.
go. So yeah, so then it is possible. Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, I
Going once,
appreciate all the
going twice.
questions. Yeah, I appreciate all the questions, and it doesn't have to end here. If anyone has additional questions, I can put my website here, and all of the links to my socials are on that website, and a lot of resources there. So I've written plenty of articles and videos and things over the years, so that they're all linked there. But if you ever have a question, you can contact me through the website or follow me on social and DM me. I answer everything. So um, don't be hesitant to do that.
Can we all stay at your house in Bethlehem for a field trip?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I've got plenty of space.
Yes.
I got a big backyard with woods behind me. Has anyone ever been to Bethlehem on that note, by the way? I know you guys are pretty far away.
No, I haven't.
Well, I'm a big fan of the town I live in, and USA Today rated Main Street in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, the number one main street in America last year. So we are the Christmas city, and uh, it lives up to its name. So if you're ever in the Northeast, uh, say hi and go downtown Bethlehem.
Okay, we'll be there in a few weeks.
Perfect.
Just leave the porch light on.
I always do. It brings the
Is
moths.
is Bethlehem
Yeah.
still? Is it a steel town still?
It's not, but the history of the steel industry is very integrated into the the culture today. So Bethlehem Steel was the second largest steel producer in the U.S. behind Pittsburgh forever, through the 20th century. And Bethlehem Steel shut down over the course of the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And then, by the time 90s were done, Bethlehem Steel was done. But the steel stacks are still there. A lot of the abandoned buildings are still there. And then as new construction develops and new development happens, they integrate the steel mill and the steel buildings into the new construction. And like we have a casino in Bethlehem and it's all steel themed and iron themed. And the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs, which is a Philadelphia Phillies AAA affiliate, um, they're related to steel. So steel's like a big part of town around here. And the Steel Stacks is one of the coolest music venues in the country. So the old steel, like the steel stacks from the steel factory, are the backdrop for the stage, and then they light them up with LED lights, and it's really cool. So, yeah.
I grew up in a steel town in Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, well, then you would probably recognize the look of the steel stacks, Mike.
You'd probably recognize the red clouds at night from the open hearth fires.
Yep.
Anybody else before we close and call it a night?
No, it was a great presentation.
Yeah, thanks for
Yes,
spending some
it
time with me
was.
tonight, guys. All right.
All right,
Well, hope to hear from everybody. Happy
Julie's
shooting.
unable to finish with us. Her phone and her speakers on her computer have gone haywire. But Chris, thank you very much. We really appreciate you. And I can always tell with a great speaker because the Q&A goes on and hard to stop. So fantastic. I learned a lot tonight. I appreciate it.
All right. Appreciate you all. Thank you.
All right, folks. 2 weeks from tonight, competition night in the Gerard Park Gym. See you then.
Have a good night.
Have a great evening.
Bye.